Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. If you don't live near Santa Fe, you can still stream the show live from ksfr.org, anywhere where you have internet access. Today, I'll be speaking with Land Commissioner Stephanie Garcia-Richard, and we will discuss her role as land commissioner, the legislature's authorizing the creation of a renewable energy office within the Land Commission, and what more may be possible with this division in place or office in place. We will also discuss other ways the Land Commission can constrain or contain extraction on state land and or promote renewable energy development. We'll get to Land Commissioner in just a second, but first a couple of quick announcements. Last week, I conducted a second interview with Robert Jensen, an author, blogger, and environmental activist. With Wes Jackson, he is the co-author of An Inconvenient Apocalypse, Environmental Collapse, Climate Crisis, and the Fate of Humanity. It is not a comedic piece. He also publishes a most compelling and personal blog on his experience of our unfolding climate crisis. Despite our first interview going for a full hour, there were questions that I had on my list that I just felt I had to ask him back to answer. And we did that last week. The week prior, I interviewed Marielle Nanasi, Executive Director and Lead Attorney for New Energy Economy. Joining her on the show was Gary Coffin, an attorney and one of the co-founders of Indivisible Albuquerque. We spoke about the PRC's possible reconsideration of the Avangrid PNM merger, and that's something that New Energy Economy, Indivisible Albuquerque, and Retake Our Democracy vigorously oppose. I want to remind you that if you're listening to this show while driving around town, you can listen to and watch the entire show when you get back home by going to retakeourdemocracy.org, clicking on the Retake on the Radio button on the right side of the homepage. It's a little bit lower than the middle of the page. And we have all of our old interviews there as well. And while you're there, you might want to look around because we take great pride in getting good guests like Stephanie on our show. And so you might find some interesting stuff to listen to and watch. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that we're conducting this show on stolen Tewa land. And I want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We could learn much from their custodial caring for the land, water, and air. And we better learn it soon. So with that, let's welcome our steward for the state lands, Stephanie Garcia-Richard. How are you, Stephanie?
I'm great, Paul. Thanks for having me today.
It's good to have you back. It's been a long time. So first question, I always like to let people introduce themselves. So how about you telling me a little bit about yourself and how you sought a seat in the legislature before running for land commissioner?
Yeah, so I'm happy to be back on the show. I always, like to update your listeners with what's going on at the State Land Office. I'm Stephanie Garcia-Richard. So I was born and raised here in New Mexico, actually down in the southern portion of the state in Silver City. And I did come up north. My husband is from the north, and so we were closer to his family here as we started our own family. I ran for legislature unsuccessfully in 2010. Tried to beat out a 20-year incumbent in Los Alamos, but I got my name out there and was able to win election to that seat in 2012. I served for 6 years in the state legislature. That's 3 House terms. I chaired the House Education Committee because my professional background is in education. And then I turned my sights to the office that funds public education here in New Mexico, which is the State Land Office. So we use our public state land to draw revenue to the tune of billions of dollars. And I know we'll get more into how we do that for the benefit of New Mexico's public schools. And I was the first woman, the first Latina, the first educator ever elected in the history of our state to this office.
Okay. And as the next question will reveal, you've been very busy. In 2019, you established the Office of Renewable Energy within the State Land Office. Over the last 4 years, the agency has increased revenue from wind and solar power generation by 1,400%. It's more than tripled the number of active leases from these sources and grown the total number of megawatts under lease by about 250%. In 2021, the House Bill 95 was introduced, sponsored by Representatives Tara Lujan and Deborah Sariñana. The bill institutionalizes this function in statute and enables the Land Commission to build on early successes for decades to come. First, given that without legislation, you were able to establish the Office of Renewable Energy within the State Land Office and so dramatically expand renewable development, what was the need for this legislation?
So just a quick clarification, Paul, the legislation was only introduced this last session. So it was actually in 2023 that they did that, not 2021. And essentially that the purpose of that legislation was to codify in statute so that the mandate is clear for any future land commissioner that part of the land office's mission is to use our lands to build and develop renewable energy. So it was kind of funny because as we were having these debates at the state legislature, we kept hearing from folks, well, why don't you have an Office of Oil and Gas in the state legislature, or I'm sorry, in state statute? And we actually went through all of the statutes that govern the state land office, and oil and gas, I believe, is mentioned no less than something like 48 times in the statute governing the state land office. So we do not need an additional Office of Oil and Gas. That mission was set out 100 years ago in our state's constitution. What we're needing now is a diversification, removing ourselves from such a heavy reliance on fossil fuel development on state land. And we felt that that would be best done in state statute so that moving forward, there is no argument. There can be no debate that part of the mandate on the office is to draw revenue through development of renewable energy.
Okay. Well, it certainly seems to be working for us. How much of the development that has occurred has been developed by private sector partners? And who are the customers of these developments? In other words, where does this energy go and who does it serve?
Yeah, so we get a lot of questions.
How does New Mexico benefit from this economically?
Yeah, so we get a lot of questions about this. So there's a couple of different parts. As you know, the oil and gas that we develop here in the state, we export. We use that as revenue generation into our state's budget. Same with renewable energy to a large degree. Now, there are certain projects, Las Cruces Municipal, Los Alamos Utility, they've all had projects with the state land office to develop and store and transmit renewable energy off of state land to their utilities. But by and large, the megawatts we generate here on state land are used for sale to markets west to help with their portfolios, and we draw revenue for that. As you know, revenue that is very crucial to our state, that right now we're almost 100% dependent on fossil fuel development for that revenue. We want to start to try to change that and diversify it so that we're more reliant on clean, renewable, sustainable electrons for our revenue. There's one exception though, and that is the development of community solar. So I know that you all were instrumental in ensuring that bill was passed. It was a lot smaller than we had hoped it would be, but essentially what it allows is small tribes, rural communities, neighborhoods to band together to be off the grid, generate on site their own renewable power in a community solar configuration, and just generate it right to the residents within that geographic boundary. You can imagine state land, we've got 9 million acres of it in every single county in the state. State land is perfect. A small parcel of state land for development of these community solar, that power does go to New Mexicans. And so we've got about 24 projects that are awaiting PRC approval for development, because the PRC has to make a determination of which of those are going to go forward. But we're hoping that state land will be used in the generation of community solar power for New Mexico ratepayers.
Okay, well, that's tremendous. I did not realize there was that much of it going on, and that's part of. We'll move on to another question about local choice energy in just a second. But would it be possible for New Mexico to invest its vast resources that are in reserves, not the land, the permanent fund, because I know that can't be invested in infrastructure, but some of the other funds we have in reserves, would it be possible to invest those in our own generation of renewable energy on state land that we then sold back to New Mexico utilities and or exported west, as you're talking about, where the profit would be, 100% state of New Mexico?
So, as you say, we have vast reserves that, could be used for investment. There have been lots of conversations around this, Paul. None of them have gained traction so far. So you know that I sit on the State Investment Council. We've been trying to actually push the State Investment Council to make more direct investment into renewable energy projects in New Mexico. So that basically means, doubling, tripling our money, because that's already, state investment funds that would then draw revenue from development of these projects. Either the energy could be sold or sold out of state or back to New Mexico ratepayers. We have not gotten traction on that yet, Paul, but I'm still very, very committed to working on it.
Okay, well, we're going to have to take a short break, and I hope you will continue to persist on that. We need to take a break to remind our listeners that KSFR is more important than ever in these times of misinformation, rampant misinformation in mainstream social media and in most political rhetoric, no matter the party. In the face of that misinformation, there is KSFR offering timely news and alerts and a wide range of programming to keep you informed and sane in these ever so challenging times. In an era replete with misinformation at KSFR, you get the straight scoop, fact-based news from Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!, The View from Europe with the BBC, and KSFR's own excellent state and local news. Plus, you get great music curated by disc jockeys with personality who hand-select hour-long sequences of music, often with a specific theme. It is music with personality, not just a computer-generated series of songs. For me, the most important of KSFR's many contributions are the informative discussions on timely issues, from Economic Update, Retake Our Democracy, and a host of other moderated discussions. Where else can you get an hour of socialist radio every Saturday morning from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. only on KSFR? You may not always agree with the views shared on Retake Our Democracy or Economic Update, but you will always be challenged, and that is an important purpose of public radio. 2 weeks ago was Pledge Week, and we've fallen a bit short of our goals that must be met if KSFR is to continue delivering the high-quality program we've all come to expect. So I'd appreciate it if when you get finished listening to this show, you go to ksfr.org, click on the donate button, and toss them 10, 20, 50 bucks, and view it as your ticket for admission to some excellent programming. And on behalf of KSFR, I want to thank you for your support. Let's get back to Land Commissioner Garcia. Richard. So next question. The Land Office oversees leasing of state land to the extractive industry. What tools do you have to ensure that drilling operators limit methane and other leaks, such as produced water?
So as you know, we have leases on state land that are legal contracts, legally binding contracts. The terms for those contracts are actually set by the legislature in statute. So, you've been following my efforts to increase royalty rates, change some of these terms so that they are stiffer. They're more beneficial to New Mexicans. They don't have they're not so one-sided to the lessee as they are today. So within that lease, we have used the terms of the lease as our leverage points. And I'll give you an example. If there is cleanup to be done, if there's a particular site that's junked out, needs to be remediated, has spills in particular, that's tens of thousands of dollars to clean up. We will use anything in our lease. If our lessee wants to renew their lease, if they want to assign it over to a new company, if they want to do new development, we will use that as sort of the carrot or the leverage to be able to get the work done that we need done. So, I don't know if you saw this, but last week we had a press release where we actually plugged successfully on the dime of the industry. So remember, this is not taxpayer money we're using. This was compelled, the industry was compelled to clean up their own messes. We plugged successfully 200 wells, That is about a fifth of the abandoned or inactive wells that we have on state land, on the dime of industry. So we use that program. We call it our enforcement and accountability program. We use the leverage of the lease to force and compel action that we wanted. Now, people aren't always willing to comply. We've taken about 24 companies to court, and the court has compelled them to comply. So those are some of the ways that we are able to get at proper stewardship of our land. I will tell you that we were, you asked about methane capture. The governor's two state agencies responsible for overseeing, air quality and regulating oil and gas, that's the OCD and New Mexico Environment Department. They did promulgate rule around methane capture that we contributed to. We pushed for third-party notification. We don't believe oil and gas companies should be just left to their own devices, and we should trust them on reporting their numbers on methane releases. We think there should be third-party verification of that, so we push for that piece. And we are now, because of the passage of those methane rules, able to assess royalty on methane that is leaked on state land, because we consider that to be an asset of economic value. And so we're going to force our oil and gas lessees to pay for the methane that they emit from their leases.
I'm under the impression that there's a real serious problem with the methane rule, in the sense that the Environment Department and the Oil Conservation Division are just so understaffed in terms of inspectors, so that they basically do rely on self-report from industry for the most part. Is that something you've advocated at the legislature to try and reverse, so that there is this sufficient funding?
So for sure, those two agencies need, they were gutted by the prior administration. Their levels of funding have not reached what they were prior to the previous administration when they were gutted. But yes, absolutely, we advocate for increased resources to those agencies. But what we also do is a lot of cooperative coordination between our field folks and their field folks. I believe what we're going to be doing down in the South is providing OCD with some office space that they can office out of when they've got their field folks down there. We do everything we can to ensure that those agencies are supported, because you're right, they are not fully funded to do the work they need to do.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're doing that. Last session, Local Choice Energy is a bill that would authorize jurisdictions and tribes to develop much larger purchases or development of energy than through community solar, freeing them from the grips of our investor-owned utilities. Is this an approach you support? And if so, why?
Yes, local choice. All right. So just for your listeners' edification, Paul, we already have some publicly owned utilities in New Mexico, and they are not the communities you think they would be. All right. You would think that they would be, some more of our blue communities. This is Los Alamos has a community-owned utility. Farmington has a community-owned utility. These are folks who have seen that it makes economic sense for them, and it makes policy sense for them to have control over where they want their energy to come from, how they want that energy to develop. And this bill would make it possible for other communities outside of these communities and tribes to have a little bit more say in their energy production, generation, and consumption.
And profit from it as well. Is that not the case?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Rather than having some, investor-owned group have a for-profit model for something that all of us rely on, it would be something that was locally oriented. There was a lot of fear-mongering around this bill. I was disheartened to see that. I mean, I did show up in person, and I testified on this bill in front of Senate Conservation. Just kudos to the bill sponsor, who was just a rock star and a hero in trying to push it forward. That was Carrie Hamblin out of Las Cruces.
She did a great job.
She did a phenomenal job. I mean, the nice thing about her as a sponsor is she's a businesswoman. She represents business interests in Las Cruces. I mean, she used to be or maybe still is, the Green Chamber ED down there.
Yep.
So she knows well the business end of this discussion. I think as we start to move towards what we want a transition maybe to look like in New Mexico, as we're building that transition, as we're having those discussions, there were a lot of young people in the committee room that day who were wanting to weigh in and contribute to this dialogue and debate. And I really think that it is in our best interest to open the door to have those voices be heard, because we're talking about what we will leave for them. We're talking about what they will inherit from us. And I think they need to have a say in that. So I know that you do a lot of great interviews on your program, but I would encourage you to interview some of those youth groups that were advocating for this bill. We also had former PRC commissioners. So they know the regulatory end, right? Senator Hamblin knows the business end. These folks, Steve Fishman was one of them, Cynthia Hall was another, they know the regulatory framework around what local choice would mean. So we had some real informed experts on that bill. And fortunately, we had a lot of folks come out to speak against it. It didn't get very far in the session. And I'm hoping that in the interim, we could continue to have those conversations, continue to clarify some of you said it on your show earlier, some of the misinformation, fear-mongering that's going on around adopting local choice, and maybe talk to some of the states who have done so and see what their lessons learned are. I'm absolutely 100% in favor of proceeding.
I actually knew that because I was there when you spoke in support of it, but I had to ask the question. Given that virtually no climate-related legislation, your bill as being the exception, passed in 2023, what needs to happen to get meaningful climate legislation through the legislature and to get the governor's signature? Mimi Stewart stated last month that to ever achieve meaningful climate legislation, some moderate and conservative Dems will have to be primaried and replaced with more progressive legislators. Do you agree with that analysis?
So it's funny because our renewable energy bill, it was a climate related piece of legislation. It actually got to the governor's desk very early. I believe it was the 5th bill on her desk. And after we saw the fallout from all of the vetoes in the tax package of all of the climate related tax incentives, and everyone just so furious that they thought they had agreement on this, it had bipartisan support, it made it through in this tax package, it was subject to the veto pen. We were like, oh my gosh, thank goodness our bill got out so early, because who knows, it could have gone down in this whole ball of flames of all the climate legislation that went down right at the end. So it's interesting that the pro tem Stewart is saying that about Democrats, because they were able to pass legislation. They actually passed it in the tax package, and it was vetoed. So they were successful in their job.
And unfortunately, we do have a gas and oil office in the governor on the 4th floor, or it would seem so.
All right, your words, not mine, Paul. But
right. I was gonna actually offer that disclaimer. So many assert that even with New Mexico's abundant wind and solar potential, to achieve 24/7, 365 days a year of 100% renewable energy use in New Mexico, we need to tap other renewable energy options. I've been exploring the potential of geothermal development as a green source of energy to get New Mexico to 100%. I'm told geothermal uses the same drilling technology as fracking, so transitioning fracking personnel to geothermal would require minimal training. Yet the governor vetoed a bill that would have studied geothermal's potential. If you were governor, would you have signed a bill authorizing a geothermal study? And what do you feel about geothermal's potential?
So we do geothermal leasing at the State Land Office, but that is part of the leasing that we do around renewables. as folks that listen to your show know, who are geology enthusiasts, there was a lot of volcanic activity in our state, which means there is a lot of geothermal potential and activity that we should be taking better advantage of. I absolutely support geothermal, but there's kind of two pieces to your question, right? Because you touched on this issue that keeps coming up around the workforce that already is trained and primed to do fossil fuel work, fossil fuel development work. What to do with them? How should we proceed in our transition with this workforce that right now has some pretty decently paying jobs? They're dangerous jobs, but they're good paying jobs. So transitioning them to things like geothermal is one answer. We've also talked about transitioning them to work on things like well plugging, taking advantage of the billions of dollars coming from the federal government to New Mexico as an energy dependent state, to do a lot of this cleanup I was mentioning before, remediation, cleanup of spills, proper plugging of wells. Transitioning that workforce into this kind of work is something that I'm very much a proponent of. So it's kind of a two-way thing, right? Geothermal is another tool in our toolbox in terms of renewable energy generation and ensuring that we know we have energy needs, ensuring that those needs are met by a reliable, sustainable, form of energy, but also ensuring that our workforce is not left behind in the transition.
So unfortunately, we're almost out of time here, and we've got some really good questions left. And normally we just stop the radio show, close, and then continue the discussion. But before we got started, Stephanie told me that she had a hard stop in 30 minutes. So we're going to have to close the radio show, and I'll have to invite her back. Damn. And we'll talk about these other issues, because we were going to talk about how we do affect this transition. And divorce ourselves as much as possible from gas and oil industry. And so I do want to offer you one last question, and that is just how can people find more information about you and your work at the Land Office?
Yeah, so we have a pretty robust and also interactive website just at the State Land Office itself. And that website is nmstatelands.org. You can also Google my name, New Mexico State Land Office. All of that should lead you to nmstatelands.org. On that particular site, you can find an interactive GIS map where folks can click on various parts of the state and see what land is leased to whom. We actually have that up on our website. You can see lands that are open for leasing or development. If you have got a project you would like to bring to us for state land, you can also get in touch with us on that website as well. You can see all of the different areas we're promoting for outdoor recreation, and then all of our press releases are on that site as well.
Okay, well, I want to thank Stephanie for spending time with us today. I know she's very, very busy. It was shoehorning a time when we could both talk. We'll get her back, though, I promise. So thank you very much, Stephanie. I also, in closing, wanted to note that on our Thursday blog, Roxanne and I announced that we were taking a 6-month break to sort out how to make Retake a sustainable organization. To find out more about our reasons for this break, go to retakeourdemocracy.org. That blog will appear near the top of the page. And while you're at the website, take a tour. We have lots of resources to help you get and stay informed. Use the search engine on the right, plug in any word or topic that's of special interest to you, and I bet you'll find several posts of interest. This is a great way to find out who we are and what we stand for. Again, thank you very much for being with us, Stephanie. And listeners, please stay active and engaged. It's the only way we fix this mess. Bye-bye.
Thank you.